He would later describe that time in his life as his attitude era, a phase where direction didn't matter and consequences felt distant. At 21, cut off from his family and barely holding on to a few friendships, he drifted through days working at a vape shop, feeling like life had quietly stalled. That was when he saw the ad. A simple listing offering free lodging in exchange for light housework. No background checks, no complicated requirements. Just a place to stay. To someone desperate for change, it felt less like an opportunity and more like an escape. The man behind the ad called himself Jackson. He responded quickly, almost eagerly, and answered every question with smooth confidence. The arrangement sounded easy. Clean the house, cook occasionally, and in return, live there for free. When asked about gender, his tone shifted noticeably after hearing the answer. His replies became longer, warmer, more interested. It should have been a warning, but at the time, it just felt like reassurance. Within hours, a visit was arranged. The house sat in a quiet, ordinary neighborhood, the kind where flowers lined porches and nothing ever seemed out of place. When the door opened, the man standing there didn't match the image that had formed in his mind. He was older, heavier, with a gray beard and an unsettling eagerness. Before a proper greeting could even settle, he leaned in for a hug. It lingered just a little too long. Inside, the house seemed normal at first glance. A simple layout, modest furniture, nothing overtly wrong. But there were small details that didn't quite sit right. Doors that remained closed without explanation. Rooms that were mentioned but never shown. A basement brushed off quickly. Still, the offer was too tempting. Within minutes, the decision was made. He would move in. The first night was when the illusion began to crack. Small black cameras sat in the corners of the living room and kitchen, not hidden, but not mentioned either. It was easy to rationalize. After all, a stranger had just been allowed into the house. Security made sense. But as the night stretched on, the house seemed to breathe in a way that felt unnatural. Floorboards creaked without footsteps. Doors seemed to close somewhere in the darkness. At 1:30 in the morning, lying awake, the silence felt heavier than it should have. The following days settled into a routine. Cleaning, cooking, quiet conversations in the evenings. For a while, it almost felt normal. Almost safe. But then came the shift. One small mistake, a poorly seasoned meal, was enough to reveal something darker beneath the surface. His calm demeanor shattered instantly, replaced by sharp irritation and cutting words. The change was too fast, too complete. It wasn't just anger. It was something controlled, something practiced. The next morning, the apology came, but not from him. It came from the one who felt the need to keep the peace. And that was when the line was crossed. What was said next wasn't shouted or forced. It was delivered casually, like a joke. A suggestion that carried something far more sinister beneath it. Clean the house in underwear. The laughter that followed didn't make it lighter. It made it worse. That was the moment doubt turned into fear. A message was sent to a friend, a quiet confession of what was happening. The response came instantly. Leave. Now. But leaving meant going back to everything that had been escaped. So instead, the fear was buried, pushed aside, ignored. Until the truth found its way in. It happened on an ordinary drive. A car pulled up, a stranger stepping out with urgency in her eyes. She asked one question. Was he living in that house? And when the answer came, so did the warning. The name wasn't real. The job wasn't real. And the house was never empty. The story she told unraveled everything. Hidden cameras. Constant surveillance. Knowledge he shouldn't have had. And the most chilling part, he never actually left during the day. He stayed inside, somewhere unseen, watching. When the truth settled in, every strange moment replayed with horrifying clarity. The noises at night. The feeling of being watched. The closed doors. None of it had been imagination. That night, the search began. Quiet, careful, desperate. And there it was. Hidden deep in the closet, barely visible. A tiny lens staring out through a drilled hole. Watching. Recording. Waiting. Sleep never came. Hours passed in silence until the sound finally broke it. The slow creak of the bedroom door. And there he was. Standing in the darkness, watching. No explanation. No reason. Just a quiet apology before the door closed again. But by then, it was already too late. The truth was undeniable. The plan to escape began the next morning. Small steps. Quiet movements. A bag at a time, taken out without notice. No sudden changes. No suspicion. Just patience. 3 days later, the door closed for the last time. The messages started soon after. Questions. Confusion. Requests to come back and talk. Each one more desperate than the last. None of them answered. And then, a final reminder that it wasn't over. An alert. Someone trying to access an old account. The location traced back to that same town. The same house. Nothing ever happened after that. No confrontation. No final encounter. Just silence. But sometimes, silence is worse. Because somewhere out there, the man who called himself Jackson still exists. Still watching. Still waiting. And the most terrifying part of all. Nothing about that offer was ever free. He had always told himself the house wasn't the problem, it was just the time. Long exhausting workdays left him with no energy, and the 2-floor house he had bought a few years earlier slowly started to feel bigger than it actually was, not because of space, but because of how neglected it had become. Cleaning kept getting pushed to another day, and that day never came. One night, while mindlessly scrolling through listings online, he came across a simple ad. Independent cleaner, cash, flexible schedule. It was short, almost too simple, but something about it felt like an easy solution. Without overthinking it, he reached out. She responded the next morning. Her messages were brief, polite, and straight to the point. She asked normal questions: how big the house was, whether there were pets, and if he lived alone. Without hesitation, he answered everything, including the one detail he would later regret the most: yes, he lived alone. They agreed she would come by while he was at work. When Thursday came, he met her briefly before leaving. She looked to be in her late 30s, quiet, reserved, and avoiding eye contact. Nothing about her stood out as dangerous, she just seemed shy. He quickly showed her around, the rooms upstairs and downstairs, and told her not to worry about his office. She asked about cleaning supplies, and he pointed her to the laundry room. Just before he left, she asked what time he usually got home, and he casually replied around 6 or sometimes 7, not realizing how important that information might be. When he returned that evening, the house looked perfect. Floors were shining, counters spotless, and the air carried the faint scent of cleaning chemicals. For the first time in a while, he felt relieved. He paid her, she left, and everything seemed fine. For a few days, nothing felt out of place. Then the nights began to change. It started with a soft sound, a faint thump from downstairs sometime between 2 and 3 in the morning. It was the kind of noise people usually ignore, and that's exactly what he did. He brushed it off as the house settling. A few nights later, it happened again, this time sounding like a cabinet closing. Still, he convinced himself it was just his half-asleep mind playing tricks on him. He didn't get up, he didn't check, he stayed in bed. Days passed, and small things began to feel slightly off. A kitchen cabinet left open just a few inches, a chair pulled out slightly from the dining table, a bathroom towel that felt damp when it shouldn't have been. Each time, there was a simple explanation, and each time, he accepted it. Until the sounds became harder to ignore. One night, he woke up to what sounded like a slow, deliberate footstep downstairs. Not the random creaks of a house, but an actual step. He sat up, listening carefully, his heart beating faster, but after a few seconds, everything went silent again. He told himself it wasn't real. Still, something had changed. He started closing his bedroom door at night, then eventually locking it. Small actions that admitted a fear he didn't want to fully face. Then came the moment that shattered his denial. One morning, he opened the kitchen drawer where he kept random items, including a small ring with spare house keys. One of the keys was missing. Not misplaced, not hidden, gone. A cold feeling crept over him as the obvious thought crossed his mind, but he immediately pushed it away. There had to be another explanation, there always was. But this time, he couldn't ignore it. The next day, he decided to test something. He left for work like usual, drove a few blocks away, then quietly circled back and parked out of sight. Entering through the back door, he stayed upstairs and waited. Hours passed in silence. Then around 11 in the morning, he heard it. The unmistakable sound of his front door unlocking. His chest tightened as soft footsteps entered the house. He moved carefully, just enough to see through the railing. It was the cleaner. But something was wrong. She wasn't carrying any supplies, and she wasn't cleaning. She walked into the kitchen like she belonged there, opened the fridge, took a drink, and sat down at the table. As if it was her house. He stayed frozen, barely breathing. After a few moments, she stood up and began walking around slowly, looking at everything. She picked up a framed photo and stared at it for longer than normal. Then she turned toward the stairs. Panic surged through him as he quietly backed into his bedroom and shut the door. Her footsteps reached the stairs, climbing slowly, until they stopped halfway. He could see her shadow beneath the door. She didn't move. She just stood there. It felt like she knew. Like she could sense him just on the other side. Time stretched unbearably as his heart pounded in his chest. Then suddenly, he made a decision. He swung the door open. And froze. Because the woman standing there was not the same woman. At first glance, she looked similar, but up close, everything was different. Her face, her build, even the way she stood. And her expression was the worst part, completely blank, cold, almost filled with quiet anger. They stared at each other in silence. Neither spoke. After a few seconds that felt like forever, she slowly turned, walked down the stairs, and left through the front door without saying a word. He stood there, shaking, unable to move for several minutes. When he finally called the police, his hands were trembling so badly it was hard to even dial. The police arrived, and he told them everything, about the cleaner, the second woman, and the missing key. But there were no clear answers. The original cleaner never responded again. It was as if she had disappeared completely. That same day, he replaced every lock in the house. But what stayed with him the most was something one of the officers said before leaving. Sometimes people like that don't work alone. And after that experience, he never hired another cleaner again. A few years ago, in a time when the internet still felt like a lawless frontier, a young man's life took a dark and unforgettable turn. Back in 2008, he was in his early 20s, reckless, overly trusting, and convinced that the horror stories people told about strangers online simply didn't apply to him. Social media was just beginning to rise, and platforms like Craigslist were booming with opportunity. To him and many others, it felt like a treasure chest of deals, a place where you could find anything you needed for almost nothing. After a sudden breakup left him without a home, he found himself crashing at a friend's place, trying to piece his life back together. With very little money and no stable place of his own, he turned to Craigslist, not for housing, which oddly made him uneasy, but for furniture. If he was going to rebuild his life, he wanted to start collecting things for the future he hoped to create. That's when he saw it, a sectional couch listed for just $45. It looked clean, almost new, and far too good to be true, but he ignored that instinct. The seller, a man named Keith, responded quickly, sounding friendly and eager. He claimed he was moving out of state and needed to get rid of everything fast, and it made sense, or at least it seemed to. They agreed to meet that same evening. By the time he arrived, it was already dark. The house sat on a quiet run-down street with barely any lighting. The surrounding homes looked just as lifeless, almost abandoned. It should have raised alarms, but instead he felt only mild annoyance when Keith didn't answer his calls. Just as he was about to leave, his phone rang from a different number. Keith's voice came through, deep, strange, slightly off. He apologized, saying his phone was broken and he was using a work phone, then gave an unusual instruction: go to the back of the house. Without questioning it, he did exactly that. The backyard was even darker, swallowed in shadows, with no lights and no signs of life. As he stood there uncertain, he tried calling again, but instead of hearing the ring in his ear, he heard it behind him in the bushes. Before he could react, a man emerged, waving a cheap flip phone. It was Keith. He smiled and spoke casually, claiming he had been feeding animals. Something about him felt wrong. He was older than expected, frail, with long white hair tied back, and he smelled strongly of stale cigarettes. Still, the young man stayed. Keith led him to the back door and struggled to open it, asking for help. That was the moment when something inside him finally warned him that this wasn't right, but it was too late. As he pushed against the door, it suddenly swung open from the inside, throwing him forward into the dark interior. Instantly, voices filled the room, hands grabbed him from both sides, and he was forced to the ground. In the darkness, he couldn't see faces, only shadows. Keith's voice cut through the chaos as he shouted commands. Then came the kicks, hard and relentless, crashing into his face. Pain spread through his body as panic took over. He heard the sound of tape being ripped nearby, and that sound terrified him more than anything else. This was not a robbery, this was something much worse. Then something unexpected happened. His phone had accidentally dialed his friend, and through the speaker he could hear his friend shouting, asking what was going on. In that moment, instinct took over. With everything he had left, he yelled that someone was there and help was coming. It was a desperate bluff, but it worked. The grip holding him loosened for just a second, and that second saved his life. He broke free, scrambled to his feet, and ran. He didn't look back and he didn't stop. He burst out of the house, ran to his car, locked the doors, and started the engine with shaking hands. As he drove away, he caught one final glimpse of a large man chasing him, his face empty and lifeless. He drove for hours that night, too afraid to go anywhere familiar. When he finally felt safe, he contacted the police and told them everything, but it was already too late. The listing was gone, the phone number was untraceable, and the house appeared empty. Whoever those men were, they had disappeared without a trace. What haunts him the most is not just what happened, but what almost did. The realization that he was not lured there for money, that cheap couch was only bait. Whatever those men had planned, it was something far more sinister. Even now, years later, he still replays that night in his mind, every decision, every warning sign he ignored, every moment that could have ended differently. Because the truth is, he did not just escape a bad deal. He escaped something truly evil.